Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Mike Shredder. This is another episode of Shreds Takes. I'm joined by Jay Dixon. Just for a little bit of context, he's an author and an entrepreneur, guy that's helping a lot of athletes get into the business realm, and just also he's made significant contributions to private equity, venture capital. So, Jay, thank you so much for coming on to the pod.
Thanks for having me, Mike. And Mike and I have a common Columbia connection, so appreciate you reaching out. I'm excited
Absolutely.
for that.
Yeah, 100% happy to. So, the first thing I want to talk about is before we get into any sort of like, your football career and, what you've done business wise, I want to talk about the book After the Game, Bridging a Gap from Winning Athlete to Thriving Entrepreneur. Obviously, taking a chance on writing a book is never easy. And, for those who haven't read it, obviously, I don't want to spoil anything, but obviously it's got great ratings on around the board. So it's a good book. But just kind of talk a little bit about like, from your standpoint, why you decided to write the book and what ultimately the value of reading a book like this would be for somebody trying to get into the business world.
Yeah. And thanks for asking and bringing up that question. So the book, I like to, always tell people this. The book isn't about me. And the reason I wrote it wasn't about me. My name just happens to be on the cover of it. But I'm quite transparent with everyone from the publisher through everyone I've talked to through the process. Like, this is a message. This is something I wanted to get out there that I thought could be eternal. And for me, writing the book stemmed from a 15-year journey where I experienced post sports a lot of pain. And so I held on to that pain for a long time. And it's something in writing the book, I found that I wasn't alone. And so, that pain is what's called an identity gap for athletes post sports. And so what happens is, and Mike, you're an athlete, college and professional and Olympic athletes, when that sport ends, they always, not over 90% of them suffer from this identity gap. And it's what I went through, but I didn't know about it. So writing this book, I partnered with a Harvard psychologist on it. We dove deep into really the research, went through 132 studies, interviewed tons of folks, and found that this identity gap was real. You got some people that, one barometer that are almost suicidal, right? And which is awful. On the other side are just, hey, my best days are behind me. I have no resume. What do I do? Where do I go? And so that's what really sparked it. And 3.5, 4 years ago, I had the opportunity. I left my last company that I had started, had the opportunity to really explore and say, hey, what do I want to do? And this pain was still inside me. Like, hey, that was such a hard journey for me when sports ended. Um, and so through my experience, so we have this pain, and the book's written as the hero's journey with a lot of research, a lot of data behind athletes and what I call the athletic education. It takes them through that hero's journey of two characters, that identity gap that they hit, how it stays with them for years after sports, and then really how to solve it or a solution, and where do we go? How do we present a solution? And get people back on their feet into successful positions in their business life. It's not the overall holistic book that's going to repair every part of your soul, but it is the intention is to really bridge that gap, like it's like the subtitle is from athlete to entrepreneur. And you can take that word entrepreneur to CEO or great business person, whatever you want to put it. And so we walk them through 10 mindset elements that are all research back, empirically backed. And then this a great opportunity in the world of what's called entrepreneurship through acquisition. How do you do that? So two routes to be an entrepreneur. You can start a business or you can buy an operating one. And just so happens we're going through this huge wealth transfer, largest in history, just with the baby boomer businesses. But then we've got all these, great entrepreneurs that are selling businesses. How do you buy that? And then how do you buy that with no money, right? Hey, I'm an athlete. I just finished college. How do I get into this playbook? I'm transitioning my mind. I'm transitioning my mind. And then how do I get into this playbook? And then finally, one thing I hit on is that athletic education. And so I backed it with neuroscience. I backed it with a ton of data too, of why the athletic education really is a key ingredient for business success. And that's really the overall gist of it. So yeah, like I said, my name's on it, but it's really a message for everyone. For goodness sake, they can take my name off it. I'd be just as happy. that message is out there for the world.
So you talk about there's two things I think that I wanted to note is one, you talk about like the path to the CEO being a little bit quicker, at least from your research standpoint, than people typically believe. I'd like to touch on that and what prompted you to go into that research and what did you find that it has allowed you to create those steps that people can look at and be like, huh, that's interesting. I didn't know that before, because obviously everyone who has an entrepreneurial mindset wants to go be a CEO, but it's not
Yeah.
as a lot of times that either you don't have the education or sometimes, you just don't believe in yourself in order to do it. From your standpoint, you took an approach from a research-backed approach, what prompted that and like what did you find that you felt was so significant that you had to make these steps in your book?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, what prompted it? Um, is look, Mike, I played football at University of Nevada. I didn't make the NFL. My resume was full of tackles for losses, and I was out in the world trying to find a job, right? And it was so hard for me. I fell apart. Um, eventually, started a company. I didn't even know you had to start a company, Mike. Like, I mean, I was football all day, every day. Started a company, had great people around me, and that went well. And then an entrepreneur came in and bought it. I thought, holy cow, you can sell companies. This is great. I had no idea. And so at that time, I'm 28 years old, I would say. And then that gentleman who bought it, he taught me a lot, and he partnered with me on another business, and we sold that one. And so, you get to what prompted it. So I'm going through this journey of like, okay, I'm having success without knowing really, I would stay up at night, teach myself P&Ls. All self-taught. And then I started a really lower market M&A firm, consulting firm. Um, and I would sit in between these great entrepreneurs. So I'm representing entrepreneurs that have built companies, anywhere from 10 to 400 employees. And I'm talking to them all the time, and in between deals, and seeing how deals are getting done. And I found that there was something else besides these spreadsheets, or really what you're learning in the classroom. The classroom is fantastic. You need to know that, but that wasn't the key ingredient. Um, so that was my last experience. So I'm doing this M&A firm, and it grew to a market leader in North America for marketing service companies. Amanda's running; it's still operating. It's an incredible business. I left that, and had the opportunity to kind of envision, what do I want to do next? So my mentor said to me, "Hey Jay, make the leap from success to significance. Like, what are you going to do?" And so you talk about that, like that 11-year CEO journey, faster than any other journey out there, right? How do I get into a CEO role? In sitting in between some of these deals, I'd come across folks that were in their late 20s, early 30s, that were coming in to buy multi-million-dollar businesses, right? And my job in representing a seller of these businesses, if Mike, if you're coming to me to buy the business, hey, who are you? Show me you're real. I'm not going to waste my seller's time, so I know you're real. And gosh, this was 6-7 years ago probably, and there were these Harvard grads and Ivy League grads, and like, what the heck's going on? Where are you guys getting this money? And so they walked me through this model that they were taught, and so I just deconstructed that. Entrepreneurship back through acquisition, search funds. It's really an emerging hot asset class for private equity. Difficult to get into. Typically, private equity likes to stay, bigger numbers than where we're playing, but it's an emerging asset class. Columbia's starting to teach in the business school. UCLA just launched a program with it. But my whole thesis, and I can back it with all the data and quantitative items that anyone out there needs to look at, that the athletic education and athletes fit this model better than a non-athlete. So I compare a non-athlete to, just your, let's take a high performing athlete versus just a standard MBA grad. The data says, and my thesis says, that athlete will outperform that person. And I'm happy to talk through those numbers, but that's really the journey there. And so acquiring these companies using investor money, sometimes you may have your own money. That means you get more skin in the game, and It's just a great opportunity with all these businesses that are looking for great owners and team players and culture builders, not number drivers, but culture builders. So yeah, that's really the where I came to it and put it all together.
Yeah, makes sense. So I guess, I love to actually follow up on that. So maybe not just from numbers, like we can go through the numbers, but also like what traits do you see in athletes that would support that thesis? I mean, is it all numbers based, or is it also trait wise that you see there and say, hey, you know what? These traits make athletes better at going to be doing this versus some MBA? Because both, can go be very successful at what they do. I mean, that's why people go get an MBA, obviously. But
Yeah,
what did you see from your research that made you, maybe from a qualitative and quantitative standpoint, that made that thesis more clear to you?
yeah, that's a great question. Peter Drucker says culture eats strategy for breakfast. That is that is true as can be, according to me. I'll start with the high level stats, and then I'll dive into those traits that we can all tailor back to the neuroscience, which is in the book as well. So, an athlete versus a non athlete in a CEO role operates those business assets at 15% higher returns. This is all data backed, research backed, academically backed. Athletes are 17% longer tenured. Tenured means they're staying in that role longer. And speaking with folks in private equity, especially at these markets, the key to success is that CEO. How do we find a great CEO, and how do we know that CEO is going to go through the trenches with us? Running a business isn't easy. So an athlete is 17% longer tenure, so they're making more money, they're staying longer, right? And then 12% lower debt. So they're using less debt, and I'm not really going to theorize on where that's coming from, but this is all research backed. What are those traits? What are those skills? Mike, you think about you know playing sports. For a lot of us, especially if you make it to college plus, you started playing sports in your formative years, right? I started playing when I was 7. When did you start playing basketball? How old were you?
5.
5, right? That became um, one thing I love. There's a great class at Columbia Business School by Professor Ingram called Leadership and Organizational Change. And you do what's called an identity map. It was the closest on my identity map? Athlete. It's just something I held on to, right? I developed that identity. So we can look at the neuroscience, and it's in the appendix of the book, but we'll go back to tenure and kind of a word out there that I don't like to use because everyone's kind of using it as resiliency. Like, who's resilient? And we're always looking for resilient leaders out there. But you can tailor that to the neuroscience in playing sports, that it develops that part of your brain, right, in your limbic system or hypothalamus to really be more resilient, emotionally stable. Um, Another thing, which oftentimes I was a football player, so I'm gonna hit on the football players. Empathy. Empathy is developed in sports. We can tailor that to the neuroscience as well. You think about watching your team, right? You think about the camaraderie with your team. You could feel what they're doing, right? If your teammate's going down, you're with them. Um, you have to translate that oftentimes in the business. At least for me, my experience, right? Like, sure, I had empathy inside me, but coming out of football, maybe I was a little, too rough around the edges. So you just got to learn how to tailor that in business. And there's 10 traits that we can tailor to the neuroscience in the appendix of the book that make athletes fantastic leaders for business. Once they transition that properly, it's just a great education.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. One thing I want to circle back to, obviously, is the people thing that people probably know is obviously like your book and stuff like that. But obviously, you played football for 4 years at University of Nevada, right? And that's high level. It's Division 1, right? Can you talk a little bit about just like your passion for football when you were kind of growing up? Like, why did you choose that, and maybe where the excitement behind that was? Because obviously, I can see that where your passion for business is, but obviously the passion for football. Football is a very, demanding sport, has a lot of just, obviously demands, not physically, but mentally and just from the team, everything like that, right? Can you talk a little bit about just that and, what your experience in Nevada kind of taught you about yourself from
Yeah,
that standpoint?
I just love to hit my head, Mike. 7 years old, I wanted to pound my head. No, it initially started my older brother. I was watching him, right? My mom would take me to his games, and oh, it's cool. Like, that's fun. I was playing soccer, right? Like, that was kind of the way we grew up. I'm like, oh, playing soccer and watching my brother. And so I want to try that. So I went out and tried it. And I just fell in love with it. I mean, I don't know what it was. It was just like in the moment. Um, I immediately had friends. I immediately had enemies that would become friends and we're hitting each other. And I loved the coaching, and I just loved every August. It was seasonality too. I knew every August, boom, what I'm doing until Thanksgiving. And then I'm working out, I'm getting bigger, getting stronger. It kind of gave me a seasonality to life. Um, yeah, and for me, that was the goal, to play Division I football on a scholarship. I really wasn't going to accept anything less. And and when Nevada offered me at that time, we had a Hall of Fame coach already inducted in the Hall of Fame. Had come back. His name's Chris Alt. And so it was Bobby Bowden at Florida State and Chris Alt. I wasn't recruited by Florida State, but when Chris Alt came in, Coach Alt offered me a scholarship, um, had a great team going. And my senior year, we were going to open up at Nebraska, and that was the goal of mine. I wanted to go to Nebraska, but I didn't get an offer there. So that was, kind of, it all came together. And what I learned at Nevada, Coach Alt is known in the football world as the little general. So he ran, an old school style program of, hey, we might not get all the blue chips, but we're going to play against all the blue chips, and we're just going to pound them, or we're going to beat them, or we're going to stay resilient. And you're never injured, you're just hurt. Keep going, right? So I learned, perseverance, and yeah, I mean, a lot of what he taught me, I kind of say to some of the people I work with. It's almost like I'm coaching them. I change some of the words, make them a little more appropriate these days. But Nevada taught me a lot, and had the opportunity to play with great team. Kaepernick was our quarterback, and we had Virgil Green who played. We had just a great team, my senior year, and have relationships for life out of that game, and the University of Nevada. But yeah, it was fun, man. It was a good experience.
Can you talk? So that segues really well into my next question, which is the idea of relationship building, right? You have created Success Coach, which is the idea of like, obviously helping to mentor people getting into business, into the space. Obviously, look, I want to touch on private equity and VCs and that stuff too. But like, obviously, if your people want to get into that, right? A, you got to be able to build relationships, and B, if you're someone that's trying to coach them, right, you got to be able to build good relationships with those people. Can you talk a little bit about just like how you have evolved that, and like how maybe like now being, a coach with Success Coach has helped you be able to build those real authentic relationships that, you say obviously like being an athlete can really help you develop.
Yeah, yeah. I almost I emulate my coaches, right? The men I learned from is really the deep down, and how I teach these folks. I just transition it so it's a little more PC and appropriate for business. And there's different ways to motivate people, but you know, the game of football, it almost comes natural to want to be a coach. I don't know for you, being a basketball player. I'm sure you pedaled around the idea of like, hey, maybe I'll coach college basketball, maybe I'll coach high school basketball, right? But if those aren't there, wouldn't it be so cool to coach other people? It's just kind of a natural progression. So let's learn the game of business and coach these people. And for me, it's rewarding to help people. Like I said, my goal is make that leap to significance. So I really just count relationships these days. I don't count the bottom line. I don't count anything else. Mike. I'm cool. Hanging out on the beach, doing what I love, living in a tent, for God's sakes, right? If I'm doing what I love, and I'm creating relationships and helping people, and I think that kind of comes from my coaches as well. They really did it for the love of us, and they really love what they do. Um, so that's really it right there. Everyone from my Pop Warner coach through Coach Alt. You know, I can think of all those. They just kind of molded me. Obviously, I had my my parents, but that game molded me, man.
Yeah. So my next question is within the world of private equity, things are obviously evolving a lot in sports. It's probably the most talked about thing. That and AI probably are at the moment. Just like about the biggest trends, right? So what about, I mean, for someone who like obviously, in my case, like has a little business knowledge, but maybe not as much of that, like why do you think private equity is really making a play? Like why are sports such an investment now for these, firms and like these funds to go actually want to go, put their hat in the ring and so to speak and invest? It's like what is making sports so attractive right now for, private equity firms to want to make that investment?
Yeah. Um, One, they're sitting on historic amounts of dry powder, so they got to put the money somewhere. I know they're improving their assets. That's what they've been doing for a while now. But really, what I think, um, and my theory is sports are really the last thing left that bring families, communities, friends together at a given time and creates camaraderie. So 20 years ago, people would get together and watch Cheers or whatever, Family Guy or whatever it was. It's like, hey, this episode's on Thursday night at 7. We're both in New York City. Hey, come over to my apartment. That's kind of what we do, and we create camaraderie. Well, now all that stuff streams, right? So I don't know what else is left. What else is left? So the willingness to pay, you go back to the business school stuff, right? The WTP, the willingness to pay. If you're Mike, you and I, like, that's why Peacock could have done that thing with the NFL, right? Like, okay, I got to go to Peacock. Like, it's the last thing left, and my family's getting together, my friends are getting together. I'll pay the $4.99. For God's sakes, I'll pay $1.99 or $200 for this. Like, this is important for our family. So I think I can't drive it to the quantitative stuff at the moment. Um, but I think theoretically, to me, it just kind of makes sense. Like, hey, this thing's really got kind of a moat around. Sports really have a moat around it. It's live events. You can't stream it. If you do stream it, you know you're kind of out of the conversation with your friends. It's already happened, and that excitement's not there. So that's my theory on it, and why everyone's coming down to it. And it's sexy, right? Social media, NIL, all that stuff. Um, just bringing in a lot of eyes, a lot of which equal money.
Absolutely. Last question for you is, what is your biggest piece of, you kind of talked a little bit, obviously, of just, how athletes can be successful, how can, they can get into space. Biggest piece of advice to young, business people coming into the space, not just athletes, but just, people are trying to get their way into private equity, into, working in investment banking and working, I don't know, in sports or in marketing or whatever. What would be your advice based on your experience that you think would be most helpful for someone if you were 22, again, going through this process?
Relationships, genuine relationships, and creating those. So like, a person like Mike, like you know, Amherst, Columbia, you've got the items to hold the conversation. Now you need to get in the room, right? And for everyone. And how do you create those genuine relationships? They take time. They take time. It's giving. It's never asking. It's understanding and listening, and then thinking, and then out of a blue helping someone. So one thing I teach, and one thing that's helped me a lot, serving me right now. I have a NCAA championship coach that's now wants to help promote the book. Right? I didn't ask him for it. I've been trying to help him in his next phase of his career, not with what I do, but just as a friend. Like, I just really like you. I understand where you're at. I'm trying to help you. And all of a sudden, he asked me, like, hey, how can I get this out there? How can I help you? So I would say that same thing, like for anyone in their 20s, give your time, and then think about it, right? And how can you help someone? How can you help them on their journey? And it'll always come back. It might not come back right away, but play the long game every time. Play the long game. that would be my advice. So one thing, I'll hit on this because I really love it. In New York City, Columbia Business School, the private equity program puts on Deal Camp. Private equity program there is really fantastic. If you're in New York City, get involved with things like that. So in your niche, and then don't go in there with a, hey, this is what I need attitude, or a now attitude. Go in there with a listening, understanding, ask questions. Just, hey, I'm Mike, and then all the questions are about that person. Get that person talking. They'll like you more than anyone, saying, hey, this is what I do. This is what I'm, and that's what I've seen. That's what I've seen work time and time again.
Well, Jay, thank you so much for doing this. For everyone listening, make sure to also check out his book, After the Game, Bridging the Gap from Winning Athlete to Thriving Entrepreneur. Check him out on Success Coach, check him out on LinkedIn. I'll put all those links in the description below. But Jay, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this. It's great to hear your insight, the things that you've been able to do, and just the knowledge you amassed. Like obviously, I follow you on LinkedIn, so I see a lot of things you do, and appreciate you coming on the pod and doing this. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. I love the Columbia, the athlete connection. And remember, the future is athlete.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, that's another episode, and we'll see you soon with another new episode. Thank you.